Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A portion for Making Sweet Tea, a documentary that we are thrilled to have at aGLIFF Prism 33. We are very lucky to have the director and producer Nora Gross with us, as well as the subject and narrator E. Patrick
Actually, hang on one
Johnson.
second. It didn't go through. We will try that again.
I think John is about to join as well.
Yes.
After all that, okay, good.
He said he had computer issues, but he should be on.
Yeah, he was having computer issues earlier.
Oh, there we
today,
go.
too.
Okay, we'll try this again.
And we have John now. Hey.
Hey, how's it going? How's it going?
Hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A portion for Making Sweet Tea, a documentary that we are thrilled to have here at aGLIFF 33 Prism. My name is Austin King. I'm on the screening committee, the features committee for aGLIFF, and I am joined today by E. Patrick Johnson, the subject and narrator of Making Sweet Tea, as well as Nora Gross, the director and producer, and John L. Jackson Jr., the director and executive producer. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
It's great to be here.
Us.
Awesome. Well, when you submitted Making Sweet Tea, it was just a film that we really loved that spoke to a lot of different issues, but was also incredibly personal. The first thing I just want to talk is obviously, like as mentioned in the documentary, there was a book and there's a play. What made you decide to adapt it to film? What opportunities were offered to you?
You want to do that, John?
We can all start. We never know who should answer what first. So I will say part of what this film is about, I think, is an attempt to, in a way, capture the lightning in the bottle. That was the first time I saw E. Patrick do a one-man staged reading of his research. And there was something so powerful about it, so elegant and memorable, that I remember one of the first things I told him is it would be wonderful to find a way to get that on the screen and to also do that in a way that allows him to not just perform it like on a proscenium arch in a theater somewhere, maybe bring it into the lives, into the neighborhoods and the communities of the folks in the film. And so that was, I think, one of the first conversations we had. And I feel like the film that we eventually put together does exactly the kind of thing we thought we wanted to do over almost a decade ago when we first hatched the idea.
Yeah, and through that adaptation process, as you guys sort of looked at like what you wanted to bring in, maybe what you wanted to explore more, was there anything significantly that had changed since the original conception? Was there anything that you really felt like you needed to revisit?
Everything changed. Because originally it was going to be a film about the making of the play, sort of behind the scenes. And then it became about so much more. It became about my own reckoning with my past, going back to my hometown as an openly gay man. It became about what has happened to these men since I interviewed them over a decade ago. It was also about the making of the stage play. And then it was also about, what does it mean to have someone's life reflected in front of them in their own space, whether that be their home, their jobs, their place of worship. And that was kind of the experimental component of the film too, me performing the men's stories in front of them. But all of that evolved over the course of the 5 years we were working on the film.
And Nora, how did you get involved with this project?
So I met John in the very first class I took as a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania 7 years ago. And around that time, I guess we've all said different time frames, 10 years, 5 years, 7 years. But, we've been working on various iterations of it. And about a year into knowing John, John and Patrick were really getting started in earnest, and they were looking for collaborators. And I have a background in documentary film, and I was especially interested in that fourth thing that Patrick just said about what does it mean to tell someone's story and sort of present it back to them and see how they respond, and the sort of ethnographic component. And as ethnographers, which the three of us are, we don't often get to see how the people that we study or write about are experiencing what we reflect back to them. So that was exciting to me.
And I think that speaks to a larger conversation that I think a lot of people are having about like who gets to tell whose story right now, and how we want people to either speak for themselves or who gets to talk about that story. Can you talk about like exploring that within the film, and when presenting, obviously we see it in the film itself, what happens when the subjects are presented with your interpretation. But what do you think? What do you think it meant for them to sort of see that in that context?
Well, even when I adapted the first performance to the stage, my intent was always to have an audience. Usually the goal for theater is to have an audience suspend disbelief. That was never my goal. Mine was to provide a platform for these men's voices to be heard, and for there to be a kind of uh, dialogic dialectic dynamic going on between their own voice and my voice as the interpreter, ethnographer, oral historian. And I think in general, and I think John and Nora would agree with me about this film project was always meant to be a collaboration amongst us as the filmmakers, but also with these men, because they gifted their stories to us. And so it was important that they have input and that they have some agency around how they are represented. And so they did. They were very instrumental along the way in where we shot, how we shot, the rough cuts. They were involved in that process as well. And they've been also involved in the Q&As that we've had at film festivals. The last one where we were all able to attend was in Atlanta at the Outright Film Festival, where they were there, and we did a talk back with all of them.
And I will say, not to give too much away in the film for folks who might not have seen it yet, but there's, for most of the men in the film, they'd seen not just early versions of the film itself, different iterations of this documentary, but they'd seen E. Patrick do different versions of the performance, except for one of the main characters in the film, who did not see it until we went back to Hickory, North Carolina. And that moment and that storyline in the film is still to me one of the most poignant, because I think it helps to demonstrate why this idea of having the men sit and watch their stories be told back to them can feel so profound and moving. And so to have been able to see that for the first time, and the audience sees it for the first time when it happens, I think is really memorable.
I do have to just step in here and say that the entire film is wonderful, but that moment in particular was one that I think is just a really powerful moment in the film. And I think it's so great that you were able to catch it so that we could experience that as well.
Yeah, I have that moment on my T-shirt. But another sort of differently poignant version, or sort of a different kind of reaction that one of the men in the film had to watching Patrick perform, which is one of my favorite moments, is Duncan, another character who sort of does the reverse of, he's seen so many iterations that he has an opinion about how Patrick should be performing him, and some corrections, and some tips for how he could do a better job, doing the voice and doing the mannerisms and the walk. And so I think there's multiple versions of the men reacting and responding to the performance.
I just want to get some questions from the chat, just so that they have the opportunity. I have one from Victor saying, a lot's happened in the past few months in a lot of different areas. Would your approach to the film have changed based upon recent events?
That's a good question. So you never know. I'm sure part of what we would have tried to do is see how the events of the last year or so impacted the lives of the men themselves. I mean, I think the film at its best is simply an attempt to capture as carefully as we can what's important to the men and their stories. And to the extent that their stories would have changed as a function of all the uncertainty, the contemporary moment, I do suspect the film, in terms of the specific details of the narrative, might have changed as well. I think the overall arch of it, its underlying ethos probably would be the same, but I think the men would be in a different place. And that's one of maybe the powerful things that you kind of get we certainly got a front row seat to this as filmmakers working on this for so long, but even as a viewer, hopefully you get a tiny sliver of a sense of how each of these characters has changed over time. And they are really good at articulating their own recognition, their reflexive understanding of how they've been changing. And so it would be powerful to hear them, because they're all authorities not just on their own lives, but on how the world around them reads their position in contemporary culture. It would have been powerful, I think, to see them talk about how the current moment has forced them to navigate the world in slightly different ways. So that's a long-winded way to say yes or no. Like, I think the core of the film wouldn't change, but we'd certainly want to be able to represent some of how the men are reacting to what's going on in the contemporary moment.
Okay. We also have some, Priscilla said, we are so excited to co-present Making Sweet Tea at aGLIFF. You know we love you and your work. Thanks for that, Priscilla.
Hey,
Is that someone that,
Priscilla.
is
Yes,
that
that's
someone you
Priscilla
know?
from Algo. And Priscilla is also a subject in my most recent books, Black Queer Southern Women in Honey Pot, and a longtime friend. So love you, Priscilla.
That's wonderful. Speaking about sort of the uncertainty of this moment, obviously, like, even when we started screening films way back in December, we did not know we were going to be doing this virtually. We did not know, what was going to happen as far as like movements and social movements and civil unrest. Now that you're presenting Making Sweet Tea in this, like, virtually and not getting to interact with people, has that changed the way that you're interacting with the people who've seen the film, the way that you're getting to present the film to other people?
I guess, I mean, there have been some plus sides in that we probably, the three of us and the rest of the team likely wouldn't have been able to make it out to all these festivals in person. So it's been really wonderful to be able to gather for, most of the festivals have been doing these talkbacks over Zoom, and that's been great. But we do miss getting to interact with the audience. That part, really, there's been none of that since the September and October screenings that we went to. Yeah, so that's been a real loss.
I think it is a tough year to have a film on the festival circuit. Whether the film festival is big or small, in a huge metropolis or in a tiny sort of back road town, every film festival has its own character, and you develop these stories. So we feel fortunate enough to have gotten to a couple of festivals before everything sort of shut down and everyone went virtual. And we still hold on to the memories we made together in those locales. And there's a version that I think we miss, and we miss for all of the filmmakers who have films that are circulating right now. Because that's one of the perks, I think, of being a filmmaker, is actually being in the audience, being in the theater, watching people watch the show, and feeling the energy of that environment. And I think the virtual festivals have been amazing, and probably more people have seen the film as a function of that. But you do miss, what makes all these specific festival so distinctive. And so I don't think we'll have the same memories we would have had if we had actually been on the road all year, you know?
Okay. I also just want to ask you, in particular, you know, when making the film, was there anything that sort of happened, or as you were revisiting, that just is just like a funny story that maybe just like didn't fit within the narrative, or was something that you really wanted to include that you just didn't have the opportunity to put in the film?
Oh my God, we had 80 hours of footage. So that's been, you know, dwindled down to 88 minutes. So where to start? One of the things that I was hoping that would stay in the film was we were able to get my 30th high school reunion. Uh, and I was really fascinated by what my classmates said about me behind closed doors. Because you know Nora was taking them off into a back room and interviewing them while the reunion was going on, and I didn't hear what they were saying, of course, until I saw some of the footage. So I was sort of sad to see some of that hit the editing floor, but you know you have to make decisions, and so that was one of the things that I was hoping that got to stay in. But and just one little final thing, one of the things that that came up when we started getting a consultation about cuts on the film was cutting my mother's scene. I won't give it away, but the scene where she's talking about her husband's. And I was like, no, we can't get rid of that because I think that is just really, really great.
I think I'd agree about the high school. I mean, if we had when we're finally done, we have it distributed. We might want to think about some sort of outtakes from there. I mean, there's so much rich content and moving content in there. The film is so much about Hickory, so I've seen the development of your classmates over time and them reflecting. I thought it was really moving, and so yeah. So I think I'd agree with you. I'm wondering what Nora would say though.
Well, I was so focused on the technical problems with that shoot. We could not get a room to do these little interviews with Patrick's classmates, except the room we were given, even after I begged for something better, was right behind the DJ booth, and there wasn't a full wall. So we were literally like right next to where the sound for the whole event was coming from, and the sound just kept getting louder and louder as the night went on. So the footage just keeps getting worse, and we're zooming in. We're super close, super tight on their faces, just to get the microphone as close as possible. And so I just see all the problems, and that was a lot of the reason it got cut. But it was some funny and some really enlightening interviews. Yeah.
You know, I just have to say one of my favorite things about your film is so often I think especially people who don't live in the South think of the South as like, you know, a place where like certainly someone who is gay and black cannot live, and it's just not an accepting place. It's not a place for them. And of course, your one-man show as well as the film is very much about how there's a complexity there, and there's a difference. I mean, as a gay man living in Austin, Texas, I have a very different experience from you, but still that kind of same understanding that, well, that's the South. That's not where people that's not where you can live if you have that kind of lifestyle. Do you think that's one of the focuses of the film? Obviously you're focusing on these men's stories. Did you specifically want to take down that narrative or complicate it in during the filming?
That certainly was the motivation behind the book, because you know you're right. Everyone thinks of the South monolithically, first of all, and that there aren't thriving gay communities, let alone thriving Black queer communities in the South. So the motivation for the book, and now multiple books, was to sort of disabuse people of that. And I think in the film, that was a byproduct, just based on the range of men that we interview, and the age, you know, from Sean being the youngest, who was in his early 40s at the time, to Countess Vivian, who was in his 90s. You really see a generational shift, but also regions. You know, New Orleans is not the same as Atlanta, which is not the same as Hickory, which is not the same as DC. So you got a broad swath of the South, quite a broad swath, you know, from New Orleans up to DC, but also generational differences. And, you know, the challenges that someone like Charles has are not the challenges that someone like Duncan has. And there's also a lot of joy. I think that was one of the things that John and Nora did a wonderful job of, is showing those, and there's small moments, you know, whether it just be us breaking bread together. Um, there's a lot of joy. It's not all about, you know, feeling harassed or gay bashed or those kinds of things that people think of when they think about the South and being gay.
I think even just the way the men tell their own stories, every single moment that's important is so textured and layered with different kinds of emotion, different sorts of affect. So it's always this case that you're seeing people, I think, articulate a story that's always much more multifaceted than the headline versions that you think you see on the news or read in the paper. And I think the film, the luxury of being able to sit with the men for as long as we did and take our time with allowing them to tell their own stories, including E. Patrick, is you see how, not only how differently they navigate the world, but also how its effect on them and their response to what they were given can often change through time, and do it in a way that allows them to incorporate, to integrate into their psyche, into their sense of self, all this new data that then they continue to use to evolve and develop and to change their perspectives and ideology. And you hear them talk about that, and you see that. And I think the film does a nice job at saying, this is specifically about just how diverse the South is as a region, but it's also a version of the South that also works in a universalist way. You could have never been to the South in the US and still have a sense of how and why these stories are so real, and so authentic. And there's a version of that I think the film also tries to pull off.
I just wanted to add, I was thinking in response to this question, but also in response to the earlier question about whether we would do it differently, whether we would, construct the film differently in this moment. I'm remembering that there was some iteration several years ago where we were thinking about whether it made sense to begin the film with kind of the expectations or the stereotypes or the assumptions that a viewer might have about how hard it would be to be Black and gay in the South, and just kind of like lead with those challenges, and then introduce the audience to these characters who are so layered and complex, and have all these moments of joy. And I think we quickly ditched that idea and realized it didn't work. But I do wonder if we were making the film now, if we would feel more of a expectation that that's how we should start, or that we should be sort of highlighting those challenges or those expectations. And I'm kind of glad that we're not feeling the pressure to do that, because I think the film is more human and more real, because we didn't feel like we had to begin there.
We have a question from Jim. What are the plans for the film after the festival circuit? I'm also interested to hear this. Do you guys have any?
We absolutely are trying to get that together. So we're figuring out now if we're going to sign a deal with the producer's rep to figure out distribution. So we're literally in the throes of that now, reading through the contract. We'd love for as many people to see this film as possible. So we're going to try to set up a scenario where they can do it. If it's a more traditional route, that's great. If it's using one of these new platforms, which seems like it might be the more obvious way to go, that would be fantastic too. But we do know, we're about to turn that corner and start to think about what distribution really will look like, to make sure as many people get a chance to check it out as possible.
It's from Victor again. As a person who grew up in the 70s in the South, he's curious, what message do you really want this film to send?
Well, what would you all say? I mean, well, in some ways, I think, and I feel like I've been very disciplined. Usually, I'm very long-winded. I feel like I've been nice and short. I mean, I think it's a film that will meet you where you are as an audience member. There's so many different things to pull out of it and to hold on to as you propel through the story. And so, one of the things we highlighted clearly is the idea that there isn't one version of what it looks like to be a Black gay man in the South. That's maybe an obvious one, but there's so many, I think, important and differently pitched versions of what people can get out of it. So, for instance, when we talk to academic audiences, we often try to highlight the fact that it's what we call a form of multimodal research. So research that doesn't just end in an article or a book, but that tries to find the different modality, a different way to render that research so that audiences can see it and can circulate. And so for that audience, we think we've done enough that they really have something that they can sink their teeth into as they're thinking about and theorizing multimodal possibilities in scholarship for the future. So I think it really is this film that's fungible in that way and gives different audiences a chance to meet it where they are. But I don't know what other folks would say.
No worry, Patrick, any thoughts?
Yeah, I've often described the show as a train ride that people get on. Sometimes they get off. Sometimes they, stay on for the whole ride and they don't. And that's just a different way of saying what John just said. I think wherever someone is, the film has something for you as an audience member. And I think one of the things that the film does is it pays homage to, an older generation. The first award we ever won was at the first film festival, was the AARP Silver Image Award for positive representation of LGBTQ folks over 50. And I guess we never thought about the film in that way, but it is true that, it does focus on, people who were born in the 70s and earlier. So it's kind of an homage to those earlier generations. But one of the things I think it does do for young people is demonstrates for them that there is a solid history, that they are not alone, that people have come before them, paved the way, and thrive. When you see someone like Countess Vivian, who, passed away just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday, I think for young people to see that is a different kind of affirmation than it is for the folks who are 40 and older.
And I'll just add on to that part of what it means to be telling the stories of some of these older men is that we were able to capture these stories before we lost them. And I think one of the most resonant aspects of this whole project for me is how many people we were able to film, just in some cases months before they died. Including the Harolds, who are just amazingly, poignant and funny characters, and Countess Vivian that Patrick just mentioned, and also Patrick's mother, Miss Sarah, who is, the most lovable person in the film. And so it's just so important that we have those stories and we get to see them forever now.
No, I agree. I think that really is one of the and one of the most powerful aspects of your film. John, I particularly like that you said like the film can sort of meet you where you are. It's the opportunity to sort of like get a lot of different things out of it. I know for me as a bit of a younger person, just getting to like hear those stories and understand their perspectives, particularly as a white gay man, it was really powerful, and I'm so thankful that we were able to have your film at our festival I really appreciate y'all joining me for this Q&A. Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to say? Anything else that you want to leave us with?
Well, one thing we'll say is thank you all for screening the film. I mean, we really were so excited to get the news. It feels like there's a version of what this film for us has been about. That's really just trying to find a way to connect with people who might not otherwise have gotten a chance to see these stories, and to just hear you talk about the way you found value in it is really moving. So I appreciate that, and I know I'm just thankful that we're a part of the festival. So thanks. But E. Patrick and Nora will.
No, same here.
Yeah.
Just really grateful to be a part. Austin is kind of a second home for me. I spend a lot of time there with Algo in particular. And it's great that my Austin family is getting a chance to see the film.
I'll just third everything that's been said. Yeah, I'm really glad to be a part of this, and glad we could all be here together for this Q&A.
I just wish we were in Austin. But
Yes.
We wish you were here too. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you joining us via Zoom. And thank you so much for the film, and y'all have a wonderful festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.